Next on AM 1480 WLEA, the Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
And glad to have with us Alfred University history professor Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, thanks for coming into the studio this morning.
Always a pleasure to be here on a rainy Tuesday morning.
Dr. Ostrower, the coronavirus has a lot of implications in the medical world in the United States. A lot of pharmaceutical products and a lot of vitamin C comes out of China. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that we're in some potential trouble here. You know, the World Health Organization, which is affiliated with the United Nations, which has been, looking at this and, with real care for now about 6 weeks or so. The WHO has said that we are not yet in a pandemic stage. By a pandemic stage, in other words, we mean a worldwide epidemic that may be uncontrollable. We're not in that stage yet, but we do know that there are now over 80,000 cases, most of these in China. But we also know that there are worrisome outbreaks in Iran. More people have died in Iran of coronavirus than in any other country outside of China. We now know that there are pockets of coronavirus in Italy. The Venice Carnival, one of the most famous carnivals in the entire world, has now been canceled for this year. I think we have a fair amount to worry about. Now, so far as the Chinese issue is concerned, regarding medicines, a lot of our pharmaceuticals, made incidentally by American firms, but with outlets in China, we may not be able to get. We may not be able to get the pharmaceuticals, the drugs that we need, not only in respect to dealing with coronavirus, but in respect to other illnesses as well. So it's a worrisome situation. I think that we all know what happened to the stock market just yesterday when it fell over 1,000 points in a single day. It was the worst drop in over 2 years, and we may see more of that today. This morning, the stock market appears to be up, what they call the futures, up about 100 points. But when you go down 1,000 points and you're going up 100 points, you're not very much ahead of the game at all. I think the other point that, we should make is that there are, we have what we call a supply chain. So, for instance, let's assume that you have a computer. The computer might be made in Japan. The computer might be made in South Korea. But if, 50% of the parts come from China to South Korea, that's what we're referring to as a supply chain. We're not going to have that computer. And there are going to be many, many different kinds of products that are going to be affected by this. And that's why the stock market took such a hit yesterday. We simply do not know at this point whether or not the entire global economy is going to be disrupted by what's happening in China right now.
History question for you, Dr. Ostrower. How long has the stock market been around in the U.S., and how long has it been completely tied to the U.S. economy like it is now?
Well, the stock market, the modern stock market really goes back to, the second half of the 19th century. But, we know what happened to the stock market in 1929 when it fell 25% in a single day. We know what happened to the stock market in 1986 when, again, it went down about 25% in one day and then bounced back within the next week or so to almost where it had been before. So the stock market is not always a reliable indicator about the strength or about the health of the economy. On the other hand, it occasionally is a reliable indicator, at the very, very least. I think that one should be a little bit cautious. I mean, I have, stocks in my pension plan, and I'm hoping that my pension advisor has the good sense to lighten up on that stuff and to buy some bonds, to buy some securities that are relatively stable. Brian, we don't know what's going to happen. We try to predict the future. What we do know is that it could be a lot worse than it is right now, and it may get a lot worse than it is right now. I think that all of us have, people who are buying face masks, for instance. Well, the face mask manufacturers are now faced with, right? A pun. They're now faced with demand 5, 6, 7 times what they normally have to deal with. And whether they're going to be able to provide all those masks necessary, say in the United States, if the coronavirus really does arrive here in force, we don't have any idea. We just don't know.
Seems to be a big concern over in Italy, the coronavirus.
Yeah. Well, we know right now. You heard what I said about the Venice Carnival. How shall I put it? Epidemics like this begin slowly, and yet they have a tendency to get out of hand. I want to offer, if I may, some perspective on this, though. The coronavirus appears to be, for people who are in, anywhere from, let's say, age 10 until age 65, not a terribly threatening thing. It is, the death rate at this point seems to be about 2%. Now, 2% is a lot by any, normal standards. But by the same token, let's compare it to the Black Death of 1348 and 1349, when, roughly speaking, 1/3 of the entire population of Europe died. They just disappeared over a relatively short time and in a very, very unpleasant way. There have been other epidemics where you have had much higher rates of lethal results. And a good example of that would be what we call the swine flu, or sometimes called the Spanish flu epidemic of 1917 and 1918, right during the First World War. Okay, it was a flu epidemic. The United States population in 1918 was approximately 100 million people. And of that number, around 700,000 to 800,000 died as a result of the flu. So that's a death rate, okay? That's a death rate of about 7 to 8%. Now that's very, very significant, a lot more than the 2% that we appear to be seeing right now with the coronavirus. But we should also remember a couple of other things. Number one, that the fellow in China, the doctor in China who died recently, who was the guy who really had, sounded the alarm on all of this. He was a young man. He was about 35 years old. So we can talk about statistical probabilities, but the fact is that everyone is at risk if the coronavirus really gets going. The other point I would make is that, again, to keep things into perspective, at this point, if I'm not mistaken, only one person has died in the United States. During any normal year, okay, our flu, okay, the garden variety flu that we deal with every single year, kills on average about 38,000 Americans. Now, here again, the largest number of those are are elderly people over 65 or very, very young children who have not a fully developed immune system. But that 38,000 is a number that we should take seriously. On the other hand, I want to remind you again of what I said a moment ago. Namely, in 1917, it wasn't 38,000; it was 700,000, with a population only 1/3 the size that we have right now. So, these things are unpredictable, and we better be plenty cautious.
Two questions for you, follow-up questions for you, Dr. Gary Ostrower. One, does this situation strengthen or weaken free trade? Two, does this situation strengthen or weaken communism in China? Starting with free trade.
Well, I don't know about communism in China. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Chinese economy has already taken a significant hit. When you confine people to their homes in a city of 11 million people, and it's not only in Wuhan, that is a city of 11 million that I just referred to. It's in other cities as well. It means that the Chinese economy is going to be slowed down. Normally, we think that the Chinese economy is kind of moving ahead at around a 6 or 8% rate each single year. In other words, that it's increasing in wealth and in scope, around 7% a year. This year, we are projecting, because of the coronavirus, a growth rate of approximately 2.5%. And that may be optimistic. It may be even less than that if the coronavirus becomes even more serious than it is. But it's not only in China. Again, we're looking at Iran. We're looking at Italy. And we may be looking at many other countries. We do not know whether we will be able to effectively contain this virus. And if we can't, we're looking at what could be a disastrous financial situation globally. But we're not there yet. And I don't think we should we should panic. We simply have to be, I think, vigilant, and we also have to understand that when the President of the United States recommends a $1.4 billion decrease in funding for the Center for Disease Control, we got a president who really does not understand what is happening globally.
Talking to Dr. Gary Ostrower. Moving on to the Democrat race for the White House coming up this November. Dr. Ostrower, it seems that the Democrat leadership does not want Bernie Sanders, and they're in a little bit of a situation because it seems like Democrat voters want Bernie Sanders. What do you make of it?
Well, I don't know about Democratic voters per se, in the sense that, Sanders right now, he is, he's virtually tied in the Iowa primary. He won the New Hampshire primary. He's been doing pretty well. He certainly won the Nevada primary, and he did so substantially. But he didn't get more than 50% of the Democratic vote. In other words, the Democratic vote at this point is really splintered. You got, maybe 20% for Biden, and you got 14% for, Amy Klobuchar and so forth and so on. You have a plurality that appears to be supportive of Sanders, but not necessarily a majority. And I want to say a couple of things about that because I think they pertain to what's happening right now in South Carolina. Sanders' support has traditionally been among union people and about white working class Democrats. Whether it will be he will be equally supported by black Democrats, by African American Democrats, remains to be seen. And that's why I think South Carolina is going to be so very, very important. It does appear that he's done quite well up to this point, and that has cut into the lead of Joe Biden in South Carolina because Biden was a prohibitive favorite there just about a month ago. The poll showed him with 49% support among black Americans in South Carolina. Today, that number has shrunk, and it would appear that, at least from the latest polls that I've seen, Biden has the support of around 28% or 27%, and Sanders the support of about 24%. So Sanders has clearly become more popular even among black South Carolinians than had been the case. Whether or not, though, that's going to be enough to take Biden down, I don't know. Sanders might very, very well get the Democratic nomination. And one of the reasons why the Democratic establishment is so concerned about that is, well, there are two reasons. Number one, they do not believe that he can win the election against President Trump. That means 4 more years of a man who I argue on this program often is not fit to be the president of the United States, not at least in terms of the values that we as Americans have respected and have valued over the course of the last 230 years. But just as importantly, if Trump wins the election, if Sanders becomes the Democratic candidate, I think that the Democrats are looking at a Senate that will remain in Republican hands for at least the next 2 years and maybe the next 4 years and maybe a good deal longer than that. So Sanders is likely not only to lose the presidential election against Trump, but he's likely to take down many Democrats in the Senate as well.
A lot of Sanders supporters seem to feel, and I'm getting this from comments on news pages, a lot of the Sanders supporters seem to feel that their candidate chances was stolen from them by Hillary in the last time around. What do you make of that?
Well, certainly the Democratic National Committee was on Hillary's side. Was it stolen? I don't think it was stolen. I don't think that he would have gotten the nomination anyhow. But, I don't really know. I mean, I don't think that any of us know. That's why, this kind of allegation has some legs at this point. But I do think that we know that, well, look, I'm going to make a general observation. And that is that Sanders is going to be, in 2020, the George McGovern of the campaign. In 1972, George McGovern was a very, very popular Democrat. The Democratic Party was united behind him. Robert Kennedy had been, assassinated back in 1968. The war was still going on and so forth. He was an anti-war candidate during a very unpopular war, the Vietnam War. And yet, when the final results came out, George McGovern had even lost his own state of South Dakota. Or to put it slightly differently, President Nixon okay, who was running for re-election in 1972, had won 49 out of the 50 states. Now, okay, Watergate, there was some, shenanigans, more than shenanigans, criminal activity on the part of the Republicans then, but that's not why McGovern lost. He lost because he was not a very popular candidate nationally. There are all kinds of reasons for that, having to do with George Wallace, having to do with the issue of law and order, having to do with, developments in Vietnam and so forth. My point is simply this. The Democrats may get really excited, or many Democrats may get really excited about Bernie Sanders, but that doesn't mean that the country is excited about Bernie Sanders. And I think that President Trump is going to make mincemeat of this man during the campaign, showing, film and so forth of Sanders with his support of Fidel Castro, with his support of the Sandinistas down in Nicaragua back during the 1980s and whatnot. I think that Bernie Sanders is in trouble more so than most Democrats are really willing to face up to.
Let's take a break. We'll be back in just a moment with Dr. Gary Ostrower.
It's not every day that history is made around here, but on March 6th, you can be part of one of our town's biggest milestones by taking a tour of the brand new St. James Hospital. Join us for the open house, where we'll mark the beginning of a new era, an era where you and your family will receive medicine of the highest order, right here in our hometown. Make history with us on March 6th at 1 p.m. at the new St. James, part of UR Medicine.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carroll, who's got some driving advice. It's weather-related.
It is, Brian. You may need the windshield wipers from time to time today, or the umbrella. We've got one wave of low pressure that's going to bring us a little bit of light rain at times today. Some drizzle, some mist as well, some patchy fog. Temperatures today up to about 40 to 45, so we stay on the mild side of normal. Sunrise earlier today at 6:51, sunset tonight at 5:55 p.m. We are now seeing more than 11 hours of daylight as we head towards the vernal equinox coming up next month. There'll be some rain, some wet snow around tonight. It looks light. Temperatures are going to be 30 to 35. We're going to kind of go back and forth between rain and snow during the nighttime hours. Tomorrow we get warm enough that it's plain rain. It'll be breezy and 45. Then tomorrow night, as colder air returns, any rain will change over to some light snow. It'll be breezy, 25 to 30. Right now, Brian, it looks like the accumulations tomorrow night are under an inch. There'll be some snow showers around Thursday. We're windy, temperatures 30 to 35. Any accumulations with the snow showers on Thursday under an inch. Then some sun at times on Friday, but still cold. And the chilly temperatures, they're going to continue into the upcoming weekend.
Thank you, Rob. Back with Dr. Gary Ostrower, longtime Alfred University history professor. Dr. Ostrower, I've wondered for some time, when is it going to happen that the internet and Facebook and Twitter will make an equal playing field for presidential candidates who have less money? What do you think?
Well, I think it's already happened. Under normal circumstances, and by normal circumstances, I mean the way in which party politics has operated since about 1960 when John Kennedy ran for president. By this time during the campaign, you would have had, and certainly you would have seen this after Super Tuesday, if you have a candidate who clearly is in the lead, like it appears that Bernie Sanders is right now, if Sanders really does well on Super Tuesday, that would have ended things. That would have meant that he would have become the candidate, in this case of the Democratic Party, in past years. But that's not happening right now. And the reason it's not is because of the ability of candidates, these second-tier candidates like Pete Buttigieg and by Amy Klobuchar, okay, the opportunity for these candidates to raise money on the internet. And so they're still a very, very much part of this. And we may have, as a result of this, a brokered Democratic convention. And if that happens, then I think Bernie Sanders really has a lot to worry about. So the internet, in other words, when it comes to funding campaigns, I think has made a real difference. Something else has made a real difference, and that is the appearance of very, very wealthy candidates. I'm talking about Tom Steyer on one point. I mean, he's a billionaire. And of course, we all know about Michael Bloomberg, who's also not only a billionaire, but a multi-billionaire. They can fund their own campaigns. I mean, one of the attractive things about Bloomberg is his comment to the effect that he's not going to owe anything to anyone because he's funding his own campaign. He has, if I'm not mistaken, around $60 billion. And if he's willing to put $1 billion into the campaign, it hardly dents his own fortune, but it means, in other words, that he is going to swamp the ability of some of the other candidates to fund competitive campaigns. campaigns. So we're in uncharted waters. And by the way, we didn't say anything about Bloomberg, but if he does he had a terrible debate before Nevada, but if he does reasonably well this week, in South Carolina, he's going to become once again a very, very credible candidate. And with all of his resources and with the backing of the National Democratic Party, people who do not want Bernie Sanders to become the Democratic nominee, I think we're going to have to take him very, very seriously. And I want to say one more thing about Bloomberg. I'm not crazy about the guy. But the fact of the matter is that he ran New York, okay? When he was mayor of New York, he did a very credible job. By a credible job, in other words, he ran the place efficiently. He ran the place without corruption, which is, almost unheard of in New York City. I think that, his record itself is going to certainly help him when it comes to the November election.
Down to the last 90 seconds, Governor Andrew Cuomo made an observation on the Bloomberg race. Cuomo said that what Bloomberg lost in debate performance, Bloomberg can make up for in commercial advertising because he's got the money to throw around.
Well, I think that's probably the case. I mean, he's done it already, regardless of what he's done in the in the Nevada debate. If what I said before, I think remains the case. If he does reasonably well, doesn't have to win it, but if he doesn't embarrass himself, I think he remains a very, very credible candidate. And those advertisements are going to carry. That's going to carry him may carry him the rest of the way. I think that other Democrats have to be and are already very, very concerned about this, and that's one of the reasons why during the Nevada debate, people like Elizabeth Warren said not a word. In fact, most of them said not a word about Bernie Sanders. They went after you-know-who. They went after Michael Bloomberg because they're so fearful about what he represents in terms of his fortune.
Dr. Gary Ostrower, with that, we have to leave it. I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks a lot for having me here.